2 points above genius. Very, very intelligent students, a wonderful physics program. The only nuclear reactor in the state of Oregon is across the street from my house at Reed College, which scares me because they smoke a lot of pot there. Pot and nuclear reactors should be separated, in my opinion. But that's kind of the world at Reed College. And what I found there was very surprising to me. I found very tender-hearted people, very compassionate people, people who had a morality, people who had an ethic, people who wanted good things for the world. And slowly this began to dismantle my and untangle my thoughts about the supposed them who are out there. And then I began to see my church life very differently. Once I loved these people, I could hear the things that were hurting them, and I could never hear them before. I was so isolated that I couldn't hear. And I began to say, wait, is that thing that's being said from the pulpit, is God saying that? Is the Bible saying that? Or is that a part of a sort of cultural identity that is really a sub-community in Americana? Or is this truly a Christian ethic? And it's not that I switched and went the other way and said, Jesus wants us to marry trees. This is not what, part of the pendulum swinging the other way. But I actually began to consider ideas much more objectively and not automatically side with whatever sort of fear rhetoric that was coming out of the church at that time, which I think is, to some degree, is lessened. But I live in Portland, Oregon, so we're kind of off the grid in terms of a lot of that stuff. Then I was still pretty apathetic in terms of the political process. And I want to be just confessional. That was more of a fashion thing for me. It's very unfashionable to bring up politics at the dinner table. If you want to get into a fight, it's a great thing to do. It's to say that you support a candidate and then ask to pass the gravy. Somehow my wonderful family has managed to not argue about this. We love each other dearly. We will be voting for different candidates for different reasons, and we could care less. It's family first. It's the body of Christ first. That's more important. There will always be disagreements, and we've learned to kind of live with this and actually enjoy it and talk to each other rather than yell at each other, and hear and listen to each other rather than just speak, And it's just been a wonderful experience. But I didn't really get plugged in or get involved at all, and didn't want to, and avoided it because it's really bad for book sales, right? And I would speak a little bit to some of these issues, basically just to sort of counter some of the rhetoric that I thought was coming out of the church, and give people something to hang on to say, maybe that's not exactly where I should be. But it would be the dumbest thing ever to jump in bed with a political party, right, at this point. Then another thing happened to my life, and it all happened this year. I went to Uganda with the American consul. I met the American consul to Uganda, a man named Bob Goff, while kayaking 60 miles from the nearest electricity. There was a man in the woods with his family vacationing, and I met him, and he was on the shore in British Columbia, and we stopped and we talked, and I ended up spending 10 hours with him, and he was a believer, he was a Christian man. And he said, I go to Uganda, I represent Uganda, I'm Uganda's lawyer, and I'd love for you to come with me. And so I went with him to Uganda, and we visited members of the Supreme Court, and we visited members of Parliament, and we visited the Minister of Internal Affairs the day he issued the peace treaty that Joseph Kony would sign, admitting that he was guilty of crimes against humanity in the North. And then we went to a remand home, and we saw prisoners, all of them teenagers or younger, many children who were picked up for shoplifting or something like this, and had spent years in this remand home because they didn't have gas money to get the child to their court date, which was 3 miles away. And so they would just stick them in the home, and they would keep them in the remand home, where they basically, about 100 kids lived in one room. And I watched as Bob went from the remand home back to the Supreme Court and met with his friend on the Supreme Court and said, we've got 100 kids in there who can't get a court date. What if my lawyers, Bob is a lawyer, has a law firm in Seattle, what if my lawyers prepared the paperwork and we were able to come and send the paperwork in to decrease the workload on the Supreme Court and allow you to try these kids? And they said, Bob, that sounds like a great idea. Bob said, would you come in on a Saturday and just try these kids and get them, either pronounce them guilty or innocent, but let's move them through the system. Most of them will get off with time served for shoplifting or whatever it is that they're in for. And Bob was able to do that. And then we went and we visited, we stayed in an internally displaced persons camp in the north of Uganda, outside of a town called Gulu. And we met with the people there, and Bob had drilled 7 wells in this town and revolutionized this entire village. And had worked with local authorities to create a court system in the north of Uganda and brought justice back to northern Uganda so that there could be peace in that region again. And as many of you know, there is peace in northern Uganda, largely through the efforts of a diplomat, of a politician. And I thought, oh, wow, I did it again. I saw 1 or 2 bad eggs, and I said, they're all bad. And I was unwilling to take a stand. I was unwilling to say, good can come from a diplomat, from a politician. And I said, you know, the system is corrupt, therefore, let's just throw out the system. Rather than believing that the system could be changed, or believing that, and understanding that the system actually affects people. And then, I still wasn't throwing my hat in the ring, but about maybe 2 months ago, I finished riding my bike from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. There were 15 of us.